Hi pals, it's me, Artie, then in pronouns only. And I just thought I'd have a chat about this last season of Traitors in the UK. So this is a show that I have a conflicted relationship with. I remember watching the first season last year, I think. I don't remember when that aired. And just feeling, I don't know, there was just like a bad taste in my mouth from watching it. I think mostly it was to do with just seeing a lot of like unchecked bias basically. So that's my main struggle with this show. I really enjoy the concept that Traitors is basically like a real life mafia game. I don't know if there's other names for that because like obviously mafia is not the greatest thing to call like basically a drama game, but there's a few people who are chosen as traitors and everyone else has to work out who the traitors are and vote them out to win the money at the end. And they have different challenges in each episode, which is where they basically earn the money to put in a prize pot for the end of the show. And yeah, so like this is something that I enjoy the concept of because I used to really enjoy that game when I was in drama clubs and doing like drama courses and stuff like that. It was probably one of the most fun games that we ever used to do. For me, I was usually pretty good at it. And I think it was just like one of the games and like a show that I think that a lot of my growing up undiagnosed autistic would be useful. But yeah, a lot of my issues tend to come down to the reasons why people think someone's a traitor. And then also the ways that they defend their reasons are just like a lot of the times they are contradictory, or like they'll deny someone who says the same thing about somebody else to just say the same thing about who they think it is. And like the first season in particular was like, I think it was a bit more noticeable for me in the first season, but there's definitely a lot in the second season too, where I noticed that a lot of disabled people would be voted out first really quickly, or basically because of their disabled traits. I definitely saw that in this season too, but as well I feel like sometimes too people were kept in because of certain disabled traits. I can't remember her name from the first season. Not gonna lie lads, the Traitor fandom wiki is not very good. I just want the list of names. Oh, here it is. So yeah, a few of the people who became like the end winners. So I feel like Meryl managed to stay to the end because I think a lot of people may have had that internal bias that she is young, innocent, etc. because of her disability. And then Aaron was also one of the end winners who had a lot of heat on him for really, like, to me, strange reasons. Because in my eyes, I can't remember if he's actually ADHD, but to me, he just showed a lot of ADHD traits, from being really upset when people thought it was him, and like a few other things that were just like very typical ADHD. I think he nearly got voted out a few times because of that. So in season 2, that happened a few times as well with some of the contestants in this season. For one, a lot of the older contestants were either murdered or voted out really quickly. Aubrey and Sonia were the first two to go. Also again, like it's not just the internal bias around behaviours to do with disability, it's also other biases as well. I've seen a lot of black people I follow on Twitter, for example, talking about those racial biases, which definitely shows a pattern in this season. The original 3 traitors were Harry, Paul and Ash. So Harry and Paul are both white men. Ash is a brown woman. I don't remember what her ethnicity was, so I'm just gonna have a look and see if it mentions it anywhere. Yeah, I don't see it whilst I'm looking at the profile, so in editing I will put in anything that I have gotten wrong or missed out. And like, to be honest, like yes, Ash was not a very good traitor, but also was really not helped by the other two traitors of the group I've just listed. They then recruited Miles, who is a queer black man, who was, I think he was a really good traitor, but I think that Harry and Paul threw him under the bus very quickly. Paul was throwing every other traitor under the bus at any chance he got. And then that's something that Harry picked up afterwards. So Ash was banished very, very quickly. I think 1, 2... She was the third banishment. The banishment before her is Brian, who again, he kind of dug his own hole because for me, very neurodivergent traits where he was quite anxious and got a little bit impulsive when it came to, I want to ask this question really last minute, and then really stumbled over his words, and I think that was the real turning point for a lot of the people on the table that day. Johnny was banished. He's an amputee, but I think he also mentioned that he has acquired / traumatic brain injury as well, which is something that he brought up because a lot of the things that people were saying were like shady and suspicious about Johnny were basically just because he has a brain injury, so he can't remember specifics. This was one of the things for me that I felt like was really, like, everyone was being really contradictory about. So because he said this thing, but he could validate it with his disability, other people said the same things though, but don't have the same validation that it's a disability thing. Like the amount of times that people just said, oh, there's a vibe. There's a vibe about you, your behaviour. And it's like, their behaviour is disabled. And it's just the thing that kept happening repeatedly. The people they trusted the most were the two cishet white dudes, or at least that's as far as I know, because I don't know if they're definitely cishet, but they're both definitely white dudes. Like the absolute fucking shock when they realised it was Paul. And every time, because we also watched the podcast thing, so when people found out that who the other ones were, they were always so shocked by Harry. His name didn't come up until near the end. Then Tracy was murdered, who is like an older white woman. We then had a banishment of Anthony, and again, I feel like for his banishment, it's a mixture of the fact that he's a black man and also because of some of his behaviours that I just feel, for me, feel very unmasked autistic in a lot of ways. Not saying he is autistic, but I'm just sort of comparing some of the traits of the people who are banished and the reasons why they were banished with disability traits and behaviours. A lot of them kept saying this thing of like, you've changed since the first day, and it's like, yeah, because you're now playing the game. You've now got to be aware that you don't actually know who anyone, like, you don't know these people. And he was always like quite blunt, direct, especially at the round table, wasn't very jokey. Diane thought he was rude a few times. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about, but whatever. If you've perceived something that he's done is rude, he was like, we'll have a chat about it afterwards. And, you know, like, I respected that from him as well. As like, you know, if we've had a misunderstanding, let's have a chat about it, it's fine. And of course, Diane was murdered. Princess Diane. The gays love her. I loved her. I was rooting for her. To be fair, a lot of the people that I liked and was like rooting for got voted out really fucking quickly. Or murdered really quickly. And I was really annoyed about it. Then Miles got banished because he's a traitor. And again, because he got thrown under the bus, he was the one who was sort of like pushed into doing the drink poisoning. Well, that's how it seemed when I was watching it. And like when it was revealed how someone was going to die because they didn't die in the night or whatever, it made it quite obvious who it was, who did it. And they, oh my god, I can't believe they took so long to find the books in that library. That was so ridiculous. I was really annoyed. He was the only traitor I liked at the time. There's another traitor they brought on that I wanted, or like a couple of traitors that I liked that they brought on. They then brought on Andrew as a traitor. He didn't even want to be a traitor. He didn't think he'd be very good at being a traitor. He'd also been getting some heat on him as well for reasons I don't even fucking remember. A lot of it was just really vague. But again, this is a man who was in, I think he said, a road traffic accident. He's like a very visibly scarred man. So again, it's just sort of that perception of like, oh, these like very obviously disabled people are suspicious, or that means that they couldn't possibly be a traitor. You know, it's very either or with that sort of thing, but in like a very subconscious way. Like, no, I don't think anybody is like thinking word for word, oh, this disabled person is clearly a traitor because of their disabled traits. I just think that that's something that's been so woven into our society. I mean, especially if you look at things that police and stuff look for when they interview people, body language and stuff like that. When body language is basically pseudoscience, the thing is, like, before I realised I was ADHD autistic, I was pretty good at reading body language and picking up on those sorts of things and knowing if someone was interested in me. Like, I'm still relatively good at picking up on if people like me or not, or if people are like treating me weirdly or not. But I am no longer able to really tell anything else, because I realised that a lot of neurodivergent traits in particular, but also other traits too of different disabilities, are basically what's seen as suspicious, and they don't like you and all these sorts of things, when it's just like, no, I'm just disabled, I'm just neurodivergent. Like, you know, classic one, eye contact. Don't want to look you in the eye. Feels too intimate. Imagine like being interrogated by a police officer and like feeling like you have to look at them in the eyes. As an autistic person, it's either like, okay, I'm going to look you in the eyes and now you're going to think I'm even more guilty because I'm looking you in the eyes real weird, or like, are we going to kiss? I don't want to kiss. Or you're going to think I'm guilty if I don't look at you. You know, so it's the parallels of that stuff are very much in this game. Paul was then banished after Miles, basically because Harry threw him under the bus, but also he deserved it. I was waiting for somebody to finally get Paul out. The amount of times people were saying like, you really need to look at people that you like think couldn't possibly be, you know, the last person you'd ever think of, and it was Paul. But also like there are a couple of people who were throwing his name out there, including Jazz, my man. I love him, my Libra icon. He's the true winner in my heart. Like, a few people have thrown his name out there, and like the more this was going on, the cockier he was getting, but also like the worse of an actor I felt like he was being. And that's something that Harry was saying, was like, you're doing too much. I was like, I agree. So even though I didn't want Harry to win, I was like, get him. So we did. However, again, autistic trait here of like recognizing the patterns. Wouldn't someone, like, I don't know, a couple of people noticed some of those patterns, but they either didn't have the clout of the group enough to get it to go anywhere, or they didn't really have a chance to speak to anybody or really fully put it together before they were murdered or banished. But like, if you look at the patterns of who and how each of the traitors were like banished and who was like supplying the most evidence, it was another traitor. So babes, if you're gonna sit there and dish out basically the entire plan around like how Ash got banished because you guys did not think that one through at all, or you did and that was the intended end result, you know, explaining the whole plan that nobody had, I don't know, some of them put it together, but like saying it all the way he did was just very much like fact and knows too much. You know, like that alone would have made me suspicious of Harry, of being like, Then we had Charlie murdered, and I was so sad because as well, she was one of the few remaining people in the game generally that I really liked. Charlie is deaf and from Bristol, and she was an icon. I loved her so much. If she's wearing hearing aids, you wouldn't see them. Has so much hair. She has so much hair. So if she's wearing, she was quite sweet and fun and goofy. Yeah, she was on no one's radar, and it was just unfortunate that's why she was picked to be murdered. And as well, it was so sad because that was the day where she was like, I'm just so scared of being murdered, and it was between her and Molly to get a shield, and she didn't get the shield. So, and I was so sad because I really liked her. Charlotte was then banished. She was not a very good faithful, in my opinion. She was so bad at retelling stories or information accurately. I can't even remember the first one, but like there was one where she told it so wrong that that person was then on the chopping block, basically. Put so much suspicion on whoever it was. Then there was another retelling, which is basically what got Paul in some trouble, and which is why Harry threw Paul under the bus, is that on their way back from one of the challenges, what actually happened is I think it was Jasmine saying something like, oh, Harry doing blah 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 was a bit weird, wasn't it? And everyone was sort of like, oh yeah, and then it went away really quickly and they were like, oh, well, it could have just been this, blah blah blah. Charlotte retold it to other people as like, well, Paul brought up Harry's name and said this, this and this. And I was like, well, for one, that is not true, but it is still suspicious the way Paul just very immediately goes, oh yeah, because he's thrown everyone under the bus. I just was waiting for him to throw Harry under the bus anyway, and he kind of was. He'd been bringing up Harry's name in other places. So I don't know whether she's got some neurodivergence that's related to how, like, not a great memory. But that, and like, she was very defensive when anybody came to speak to her about like, hey, I think you could be a traitor, particularly with Jasmine. So I think there was a little bit of bias issues there. And like, I thought everything that Jasmine was saying was just completely fair. Jasmine as well she's kind of similar to Anthony in a lot of ways, is that she's very direct, very like clear, can be a bit blunt, and like I don't even think defensive is even the right word to describe how she responded to people, because when people accused her, they accused her with just like really baseless accusations of like, basically like, you just give me a vibe. And she's like, well, you just give me a vibe, so I think you're suspicious because that's all you can provide is you giving me a vibe, which is like so fair. I would feel that way. I'd be like, sorry, if you think I'm giving you a fucking vibe and can't tell me why you think I'm a traitor, that's suspicious to me. So yeah, Charlotte kind of dug her own hole as well. And she said like, oh yeah, I've been wondering why I hadn't been killed or banished or whatever. And like, I wondered maybe it's because I'm close to Paul. And this was then a pattern that started showing up. It's like anybody who believed a traitor wasn't a traitor just because the traitors were doing a good job. If the traitor was then banished, that person who was like close to them or defended them for a while was then like next up on the chopping block. Because yeah, the previous banishment was Paul, then it was Charlotte. So that's one of the things that pissed me off a lot, is like, just because somebody defended a traitor does not mean they are a traitor. And then the kind of weird jumps that like a lot of people went to assume that somebody was definitely a faithful, and it's like, that makes no sense. That makes no sense. So then they recruited Ross at some point in there, and Ross only joined because he wanted to basically see who it was and kind of throw some rocks around. I was rooting for him, to be fair. I was like, yeah, come on, take him down. And he kind of did, but then he definitely rocked the boat. He purposefully went around talking about the other two traitors, but especially like Harry. I was planting some of those seeds, and I was like, yes, go off, my guy. Yeah, unfortunately, he went a little bit too hard. He wasn't tactful enough, and immediately got thrown under the bus. But also, they recruited him specifically, and they'd recruited Andrew for this reason too. Those two were recruited because they'd already had some like suspicion on them, so they could be quite easily like thrown under the bus. Easy sacrifices, which sucked. Ross was then banished. Jasmine had been defending him and was like gobsmacked to find out he was a traitor. Then that night as well, Zack was murdered, and Jasmine and Zack had been fighting for like several days. And there are some people who were just so caught up on that as well. And it's like, I would also have fought Zack for the way he was going for Jasmine too, with no actual evidence. The way these people go, this is facts. I have actual evidence, and then all they have is hearsay or like theories based on like just how you behave and not actually seeing anything weird. And then they'd ignore people who had actual evidence, like Jazz. Jazz had a lot of actual evidence. I think somebody as well mentioned at some point, because Harry had picked up a shield and he was using that as like a cover for recruiting a traitor so that no one would die. So people would, one, think he was a faithful because, oh, well, you've got the shield and certain people didn't know it, which also threw Ross under the bus in that instance too, because they literally just recruited him and he was like, oh, I didn't know you had a shield, because he didn't until he was recruited. And that just put him in the line of fire immediately. So yeah, both diverting attention from himself, covering the fact that there was a recruitment, but also making himself look more innocent. And it's like, I think someone did bring up, oh, but it could be a double bluff. And it was just so quickly like swept away. It came up again occasionally here and there, but mostly swept away. And I was like, that's actual like evidence, is to consider all of the options. Because then that led to Jasmine and Evie, well, one looking at each other, but everyone looking at both of them. So those are the next two who are banished. And again, I liked Evie as well. Evie, I believe, is a queer woman, because there was one line in the show where she was talking about how home is the two dogs and the missus. But that's like it. We barely know anything about Evie. I feel like there are certain people on the show who like didn't share shit about themselves. I'm like, you know, iconic. Live your life. But also I'm just like, I want to know more. And, you know, while she'd been wrong for a few things, particularly when it came to Jasmine, and like everyone just had this terrible habit of getting really tunnel visioned on particular people. And like I felt like she played a really good game. I really liked her, even though she'd been quiet for a lot of it. Yeah, again, she was then pegged as a traitor because she defended the previous person. Or like, no, not defended, because she had had this clash with Jasmine. Like those two were like, well, if it's not me, then it's you. So that, like, they do this really strange thing of like, well, it's got to be these three people because of this reason, ignoring this other reason over here. So we're going to pick off each one of them and then be mostly wrong or entirely wrong. So we were left with Andrew, Jazz, Molly and Harry. Jazz, icon of icons. He'd fed a few people information. So Jazz is a South Asian man, but basically Jazz is one of the few people who shared like a really intense backstory. That basically semi-recently they found out that his dad had an entire other family that he'd been keeping a secret for years. So he was very aware and used to being just straight up fucking lied to. And to be fair, I think he was probably one of the most on it and tactical and smart players. I think him and Diane were probably the best ones. Zack would be in my list. However, he kind of just like, whenever he got an idea, he went for it without really ever thinking about it, and was most often wrong. I think as well, the thing that really took the cake was that when they were doing the trial where they had to answer questions and get to the end with their money, he went to go pick up the clue with the bag of money and it was a trap, and then they lost the money because he couldn't throw the money back out to Jazz. So Like, he literally had said, oh, I think I'm more the brains and Jazz is more the, like, physically fit, brawn person. And he didn't use his brain. Quite early on, Jazz had been, like, telling people that he had suspicions about Paul. He told a few people, and Paul came to him at some point saying, Harry said that if you die, then it's definitely me. So we need to have a chat about it, blah, blah, blah. Like, he cottoned on immediately of like, why would, out of all the people who I've spoken to, Harry's the one to tell you? So from very early on, he'd had that tiny little thing about Harry, and he saved it until right at the end. Unfortunately, Andrew managed to get himself banished so quickly because he was like, I don't trust Harry, so I'm going to go for him, and threw out a bunch of stuff about Harry. He got voted out. My mum was like, oh, why didn't Jazz vote for Harry like Andrew did? And it would have been 2-on-2. I was like, well, I guess because tactfully, if you know he's a traitor and you know the other two are going to vote for him, you're going to vote for him too. You've at least got rid of one traitor. So he went. And that was definitely his own thing. But I mean, I respect him for it. I respect everyone who tried to take Harry down. I was so angry watching this man. So, but yeah, Jazz had brought up as well. He'd said to Molly, because Molly and Harry are like little besties on the show. Jazz has said to Molly, like, you're the only person I'm 100% sure is a faithful. So I'm going to bring up a question tonight. And I want you to really pay attention to the person who I'm talking to and really think about it. And again, this is where I think everyone started to forget this whole, you need to think about who you least expect as a traitor. Because Molly dropped the ball. Molly dropped the ball. Yeah, Jazz brought it up. Harry had a really shit response, to be fair. There was one response that would have worked, that would have been a good cover, but he didn't use it. I think he was just so shocked. And he said in the aside interview things, he was like, I think I've really underestimated Jazz as like a really key and really good player in this game. I'm like, yes you did, bitch. So like, yeah, they'd gotten rid of Andrew, so then they had to throw their pouches in again, and of course Jazz's pouch is red to say, no, we gotta vote again, babes. And that's where Molly had to decide whether she was voting for Jazz or Harry. First she wrote down Harry's name, and then she changed it to Jazz. I'm just like, you know, this was where a lot of the frustrations built up for me. This sort of thing happened repeatedly of like, oh, I've had my suspicions about you, Jazz, Molly would keep saying, and then have no evidence for her suspicions. Just a vibe. You just act weird. And you're like, you've got to give more than that, babe. And this is not just like a slight to Molly at all. So many people did that in this season, and it really, really pissed me off. Whereas Jazz had and often provided actual evidence, like actual anecdotal evidence from either himself or other people. There was evidence that he brought up there. It was the evidence that Andrew said just beforehand. You know, the people talking about the double bluff a little while back. And also, like, if he was the traitor at that point, why would he have thrown in the red powder bag? You know, like, simple as, why would he have thrown that bag in if he and Harry were going to win all this money? So, like, obviously it's either not Jazz or but either way, it's definitely Harry. None of it made a difference to Molly. She was just so sure that Harry was the faithful. There was no talking sense into her. And then also Molly herself is I think she says she's a disabled model. She has a limb difference. There was quite a funny moment where everyone was tied to poles quite early on, and she was like, oh, there are benefits to only having one hand, because she immediately got herself out of being tied on the pole and could start helping other people, like untying other people. And also she has a stoma. I believe she has colitis. She did not get much screen time for a really long time. And like, I guess it's probably because they know she lasted till the end, so they could save some of that screen time for later and sort of use the screen time earlier on for people who were gonna go soon or were getting into more drama at that point in time. Yeah, she went under the radar quite a lot. I think her and Charlie went under the radar a lot. Like, nobody really ever questioned either of them.
I think that could have also been because they were both blonde white women with disabilities versus some of the other disabled people who were not blonde white women, for example.
And yeah, like, I'm glad that she got that moment on TV to kind of talk about those things, because she's one of the few people who is definitely more on the activist side of talking about disability. A lot of the others are just like, you know, which is the thing with TV. And again, something I say all the time, we need more disability representation generally of all kinds, whether it is them being a bit ableist or internalized ableist, or just being a normal person. Because like, a lot of people have their own ways of dealing with it and living with it. Johnny often made jokes about how he became disabled. He was in the army and was blown up, basically. Andrew is less likely or less able to make jokes about that sort of thing, especially because it had such an impact on his self-esteem and things like that. So some of the things he said were a little bit internalized ableist. And like, people like Charlie talked about it, but not a lot. It's what, yeah, she was one of the people who was like, this is just part of my life. It is what it is. And then other people that I've mentioned who I've said sort of display neurodivergent or disabled traits are less likely to be diagnosed, possibly. So yeah, this was kind of the only person who is disabled who had more of like a political activist kind of vibe to the way she spoke about things, and that she just wants more people to feel comfortable, confident with whether it's their stoma or their limb difference, etc. So I am glad that, yeah, she had that moment in such a fucking popular show. But unfortunately, she let Harry win and take the nearly £100,000. So yeah, like, the biases you see go in multiple directions, and it is just a little bit frustrating to see those sorts of things playing out in real time. Well, not real time, but you know, seeing those things play out in almost like a mini version of the real world. Because yeah, a lot of disabled people, a lot of racialized people get in the shit just for being themselves. And like, a lot of the times, if they are kept around, it's either to be used as a sacrifice later on, or as like an easy target for other people to use, just to suit their narratives. And also, like, it was very, witnessing the way the Traitors worked this season was frustrating, to be honest. They turned on each other so fast. I feel like the best tactics as traitors is you stick together for as long as possible and then maybe start throwing people under the bus. But like, you can't throw people under the bus that soon. And a lot of that was mainly orchestrated by Paul, so he definitely got his comeuppance for that. And yeah, it was just really difficult watching them recruit people specifically to use them as sacrifices. Also, majority of the people they recruited were cishet white men, because you know, the initial three who were picked were Ash, Paul and Harry, and Ash was the only woman and only one of two racialized people chosen, or like one, yeah, because she was initially chosen, and then they recruited Miles, who was the only queer person and a black man, and then the rest of them were all perceived because it may not be correct, because there was definitely, like I said, lacking a lot of personal backstory for a lot of these people, but the rest of them were perceived cishet, white, able-bodied men. Well, Andrew's disabled, but yeah, you know what I mean. It was still cishet white men, and it was just, yeah, it was just weird. It was just odd that that's the route that went. I think as well, they killed off or managed to get banished so many people early on who would have wanted to be a traitor, so that when they were recruiting people, the only people who would possibly even say yes were the white men. And even then, they weren't saying yes because they wanted to be a traitor. They were saying yes because, in Andrew's case, he thought he'd probably be murdered otherwise. Or in Ross's case, he wanted to find out why his mum was picked and to fuck some shit up. Yeah, like, some of these moments were really difficult to watch. It was like, I don't know, I think it was worse for me in the first season because there was just some really, really, really obvious ableist moments. Like I think the lady who wanted to spend the money on a bionic hand was voted out so soon because of that. They were like, you want this really bad, so we think you're a traitor. And it's like, we're all here for the money for one reason or another. What do you mean? So whilst I think the concept is fun and interesting, and it's something that I would enjoy participating in if it was like, I don't know, a party, you know, like people do murder mystery parties, like real life Cluedo vibes. I think that's something that I would personally enjoy, but not in this context because everyone's reasoning is just not reasonable. Their reasons don't make sense. They're not logical in the slightest. And that will piss me off. So, yeah, I don't know. I think, I don't know if I'd be able to mask well enough anymore to get through something like this. It would be interesting. Shall I sign up for the Traitors? Half joke, I don't think I would deal with doing, like, travelling up to Scotland and being there for, I think, 4 weeks or more. I can't remember how long it is. And having all the stuff I need, like, food and meds wise, to be there. But yeah, those are my thoughts for the season that's just happened. Let me know what you thought. Who were your favourites? I think I had changing favourites throughout, but I definitely liked Diane. I liked Miles. I liked Ross. I liked Jasmine, Charlie, Evie and Jazz, like, sort of the most. And I did like Brian. I was so sad that he went so quickly because I was like, haven't really, like, you've had like no screen time. I feel like we've not been able to get to know you in the slightest. And I felt bad for Kyra, I think, as well, because again, she didn't get much screen time, or we didn't get much screen time because he was the first one murdered. Sonia had a bit more screen time at the start, especially when she was like, traitor, are you a traitor, at Ash, and Ash was like panicked and did a really bad job covering that up.
I've just seen as well, doing some of my researchy things to complete this video, that actually Sonia had a disabled son who was autistic and had other disabilities, but he died a few years ago. And like, one of the things she said is like, I got really good at learning body language because of my son. And at first I was like, don't really believe you. But then when it was sort of explained that her son was multiply disabled and non-speaking, I was like, actually, she probably could have been like a really big threat actually to the Traitors.
But yeah, who did you like? What did you think of all the things that happened? Obviously I didn't cover everything. Impossible. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I just felt like I wanted to. I was so upset that Jazz did not win. I just wanted Jazz to win. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Share my videos if you think other people would enjoy them or benefit from them. And let me know if there's anything else you would like to see me talk about when it comes to TV, media-y things. So that's it for this week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.